Hi, in this video we'll take a look at relationship selectors. CSS has a way to select elements based on their relationships. We have to remember that a web page is represented by an HTML hierarchical structure. You should think of it as a family tree, where the HTML tag stands at the root of the family tree, like the grandparent, and then you go down, descendant by descendant, visiting children and siblings until you get to the bottom of the family tree. CSS can use those relationships between the elements of the family tree, the HTML elements in your page, to apply styles to specific elements within the tree, based on their relationships with the surrounding elements. Let's see what we have got. We have descendant selectors that select elements that are contained within other elements, child selectors, used to select an immediate child of an element, next sibling selector, used to select an element placed right after another element. Now let's go back to the example that we created in the last video, and let's see if we can solve the problem that we had in selecting the H1 title using relationship selectors. We can try first with the descendant selector. The descendant selector targets only by containment, and we will use it to try to select the H1 because it is contained within a section element. And we can write it this way. What we are doing is to write down the path that the browser needs to follow in order to get to the specific element that we are targeting. What we are asking the browser is to traverse the document, look for section elements, and if it finds any, look if they contain any H1 element. Or reading the path from right to left, I want to target H1s that are contained within a section. If I save and I go back to my page and I refresh, it seems that nothing has changed. And why is that? Well, if we have a look at our file, or even better, if we have a look at our hierarchy, we can see that here we have the first H1. H1 is contained within a section tag, so the rules should apply to it. Then let's go down. We have an article and we have an H1 again. Now this H1 is red. And why is red? It is red because we use the descendant selector, and the descendant selector says that each one will be selected, will be targeted if it's contained within a section. Being contained means that the section can be its immediate parent or even one of its grandparents. And in fact it is. Section contains all of the articles, and all of the H1s in this article are grandchildren of the section. So the descendant selector that we used applies to all of the children and grandchildren and grandchildren of an element, without taking into account where they are in the hierarchy. To solve this problem, we need to use an immediate child selector. What we want to do is to target the H1 that is an immediate child of its parent, and not contained within the hierarchy, but whose immediate parent is a section. And we can do that using a child selector. The child selector is like the descendant selector, but we use the greater than symbol, or the angular bracket, between the parent and the child. That means that the element targeted from the first selector is directly connected by a father-child relationship with the following one. If we save, we go back to the browser and we refresh, the situation is improving. It's not yet perfect maybe, but it's improving. So right now we have that the H1 child of the section is correctly selected and the articles now are not, and that's perfect. But in the page we have two sections, each one containing articles. And even in the second section we have an H1 that is a child of a section. But let's suppose that we want to target only the first section and not the second. Well, there is another way to solve the problem, still using the child selector, but we need to change the way we select the element. And we can do this using classes, for example. We have that each section has a class of articles because each section contains articles. But we can qualify each section even better, and we can add another class to the section. Let's say that I want to define this section as the latest section and this section as the archived section. Now if I do that, I can use one of these classes to create the relationship between the parent and the child in order to select only the H1 that is related to the latest article section. I can do that using a class name instead of a tag name. So if I use latest as class name, what I'm telling to the browser is to apply the color red to the H1 that are immediate children of an HTML element with the class latest. So if I go back to the browser and refresh, I will see that the red color is applied only to the H1 that is a child of a section with the class latest. Now for maximum flexibility, selectors can be combined. That means, if we go back to our file, that we are not limited to use one single keyword in selecting a path, but we can say, for example, that we want to select H1 elements that are immediate children of a section with a class latest. So we can also write something like this. This is a compound selector that selects an element using an element selector with a specific class name. That can be applied to, even for example, if we want to use multiple classes, we can do that. We can just chain them and we can write something like this. That says that we want to select all of the H1s that are immediate children of a section element that has both latest and articles classes. So if we go back to our browser and refresh, we get exactly the same result. And we have a very peculiar and precise selector that selects only the H1s that are immediate children of a section with both classes. When using a compound expression like the one that we just wrote for the section, remember to put everything in one single word without spaces. Otherwise, if you put a space between, for example, the section and the class name, that will be interpreted like a descendant selector. So that's why everything must be packed up in one single string without spaces. Okay, let's go back to our editor. Let's suppose that we want to give a specific color to all of the anchors, the links that we have within the articles. We want to target only the more links that we have created here. We don't want to affect the footer links. So we can just create another rule, a descendant rule. Let's say that we want to target all of the anchors contained within an article and give them a specific color. Let's say green. We save, we refresh, and only our article links are green, and that's perfect. But we want to expand our code. We want to create for each article another link that allows you to rate the post, and each article will have a rate link. Even here, yeah, why not? So let's say, go back and let's refresh. And we have also this link in green, but maybe we don't want it to be green. We want the rate link to be yellow or another color. How can we do that? So we cannot use a descendant selector because the descendant selector is selecting all of the anchors present within the article. Normally you would think maybe in adding a class to this article like rating, so you can target that specific element within the page. And indeed, it could work. It's the first one to be yellow, only the first one, because it's the only one I added the class rating. But there is another way to get the same result without having to add a class to the element. Sometimes if you can save code, it's even better. We can use a sibling selector. Basically, a sibling selector it's used to select an element that comes after another element. So if we look at our article, we have an H1, and at the same level we have a paragraph, and after the paragraph at the same level we have an anchor. All of these three elements, the H1, the paragraph and the anchor, are siblings. If we look at the document structure in the Chrome Inspector, we can immediately see that they are at the same level. H1, paragraph and anchor. So we can maybe target this anchor as a sibling of the paragraph because it comes next after the paragraph. And we can do that using a sibling selector. So instead of doing this, we can say that we want to select an anchor that comes after a paragraph. The plus sign creates a sibling relationship between the two elements that are around it. And that means that the element on the left comes before the element on the right, but at the same level in the hierarchy. So if we save and refresh, we now see that all of the rates link, I did a bad choice with the yellow, I know, all of the rates link are now selected and colored accordingly. So to recap, we have seen descendant selectors that select elements that are contained within other elements, child selectors used to select an immediate child of an element, and sibling selectors used to select an element placed right after another element.